Let's get this sports podcast party started, all right?
The JAYREELZ podcast.
What is happening, my good people? Greetings. How are you? How's it going? How's everybody doing out there? What is the latest and greatest? Hope everybody's doing well, feeling fantastic, in excellent spirits. We're precisely a week away from the unofficial beginning of summer. Can you believe it? But we're just seconds away from the best sports podcast that covers everything. That's right, I said it. And why? Because name me another podcast out there that doesn't stick to just one sport. I'm waiting. Still waiting. As this is the JAYREELZ podcast with your host, JAYREELZ. For my first timers, welcome aboard. And for those who've been banging with me going back to the very beginning, somewhere in the middle, or even as early as this past Thursday, I welcome you guys and gals back. And now we can finally put to rest the second round in both the NBA and NHL. And now we have the Final Four in each sport. Of course, you and I got to start off with the basketball, considering my team flag is at half-mast. And trust me, I will unpack the Celtics in a matter of moments. But I'm going to start backwards here because we have to talk about yesterday, a Game 7. Really, in essence, a Game 6. Because when OKC, Denver... I said this on the podcast Thursday where the Thunder, I thought, would make a big statement if they would have won a Game 6 on the road in Denver, considering that they were down 2-1 in the series and they had to get that big-time Game 4 on the road in the Mile High City, which they did. And then, obviously, Game 5, as we talked about there on Thursday, they won. But Game 6, when you had Jamal Murray put up a big performance, Julian Strawther off the bench at 15 points in the second half, and Nikola Jokic had a double-double, leading the way with 29 points. And even though it was, I don't want to say tooth and nail, but it was competitive, but the Nuggets went ahead pulling away. Aaron Gordon was a big question mark because he had a left hamstring strain toward the end of the game, and who knows what was going to happen as far as his status come yesterday. And, of course, he did play in the game. But all the talk that I had from Thursday night up until yesterday was that the Thunder were about to play the biggest game in their franchise's history, arguably, and certainly their biggest game since Game 6 and even Game 7 of the Western Conference Finals in 2016. That was the last year that Kevin Durant wore that uniform, and we know what happened. The big Klay Thompson game in Game 6 where he scored 40-some-odd points, and then obviously them going away winning in Game 7. That was the year that the Warriors, 73-9, and we know what happened to them in the finals against the Cavaliers, but for the Thunder, this was, like I said, an enormous game for them. If they would have lost this game yesterday, this would have been a black mark on that team, considering, as I've said a million times here over the last few weeks, as the 1 seed in the conference, 68 wins, and if the Nuggets, even with their championship DNA, if they would have found a way to win that game yesterday, that would have been forget about enormous. That would have been just a borderline death knell to the franchise. And I get it that the window of their championship aspirations is slowly but surely opening. And with their youth, and obviously with even draft picks that they have coming down the pike, we know that the Thunder are going to be around here toward the end of the decade and possibly even beyond. But still, you can't be a 1 seed 2 straight years, especially this year, and then not make it to a conference final. But as we saw there yesterday, even after a sluggish first quarter when they were down by 11 and down by 5 after the first frame, from the second quarter on, basically the second and third quarters, that's when they took off behind SGA's 35, go along with Jalen Williams' 24, and the Nuggets had no answer. At that point, they went past them standing still, and the Nuggets, they gave it a good fight there, and a lot of people thought, even after that first quarter, trying to shake out some cobwebs, where I thought that the Nuggets would have prevailed, having that extra day, and maybe with the extra day that the Thunder had to sit on a series that was tied at 3, knowing that they probably should have disposed them at least in 6, considering, or maybe even in 5 for that matter, considering how they blew Game 1. And as it was, they were able to just blitz through that second and third quarter and went on to a, 135 to 95 game. They won by 30. Actually, they were up by 40 at one point, and the Thunder now prevail and move on to the next round. And, of course, we'll talk about Minnesota OKC, which will tip off tomorrow night in the conference final. That on ESPN, where the Eastern Conference will be on TNT. And as far as the East goes, they are still celebrating in the streets of Manhattan. And what are they celebrating? I don't know. All right, they beat the big bad Celtics, even without Jason Tatum. Not that that's a big factor. You know I'm going to unpack that in a minute. But I didn't realize they started giving out Eastern Conference appearances to the final trophies as of Friday night at around, 11 o'clock. Because the fans, whether it be on 7th Avenue or Stephen A. pointing to the scoreboard at the end of the third quarter at the Garden, or Spike Lee taking bows and handshakes. And listen, I get it. It's been 25 years since the team has been to a conference final, but you haven't won anything. In fact, you haven't come close to winning anything. So I didn't get the craziness when it comes to that. And listen, take it from me. I'm a Met fan. Even when the Mets made it to the NLCS last year, and granted it was 10 years prior to the last time they made it to an LCS when they went on and won a pennant against the Cubs, or really 9 years when you do the math. But was I jumping up and down? Was I taking bows when Francisco Lindor hit the grand slam, which propelled them to get into the NLCS? Absolutely not. And I get it. 9 years is not 25. And with the Knicks being out in the desert pretty much for the first part of this century, but still, all right, you want to celebrate? Fine. But to me, it was just over the top. And I get it that the city will probably burn down if they get to a finals, and who knows what will be left of it if they do happen to win an NBA championship. But I'm sorry, I got to call it like I see it. As much as that was a coronation and just bludgeoning the Celtics there, that at one point they were up 92-51 and they went ahead to win, 119-81. And yes, it was a party. It was a Friday night celebratory. Okay, fine. But it was just to make it to the Eastern Conference Finals. So that I'm not going to get. And you could tell me otherwise. I'm sorry. Not this guy. So for the Knicks, congratulations. That was a resounding win. Obviously, their best performance here in this postseason. And now that they move on to play the Pacers here, which we saw this series last year in the conference semis. And we're going to unpack that a little bit too. Last year to this year. I understand it's a different season, etc. But there is a little bit of a correlation that I want to unpack, which I'll touch on in a moment. But as far as the Celtics, as those who listen to the podcast, whether just recently or have for years, you know I'm a huge Celtic fan. And I will say this. I get it. It's just 3 days removed from this loss, and it still stings. It's still bitter. And this isn't even including the Jason Tatum injury. But we're going to look back on this series maybe 5, 10, for sure 15, 20 years down the road. And when we think about it, whether the Knicks win a title or not, or even get to the finals, this was a series that the Celtics, if they could do it all over again, you know they're kicking themselves into the offseason, number one. Number two, if they could do it all over again, this series would have been over in 5 games. And people could say, oh yeah, now you want to say this, JAYREELZ, now you want to come out and rain on a Knicks parade and talk about how you should have deserved to win, so on and so forth. And listen, obviously they didn't. They couldn't throw the boat or the ball into the ocean off the side of a boat in games 1 and 2, and more particular game 2, because as frustrated as I was after game 1, game 2 was even that much more sickening in my eyes and even in my stomach for that matter. But like I mentioned, 20 years down the road, we're going to think back on the series and be like, how the hell did the Knicks win this series? To me, how I equate that as a Met fan, and this goes out to my guy Jimmy, who knows damn well, and he hasn't responded to me since his post there on Threads a couple days ago, where he said, oh, the Knicks locked down the Celtics. It wasn't a thing where the Celtics gift wrapped the Knicks this series, in particular games 1 and 2. Well, Jimmy, let me ask you this. When you think back to the 1988 baseball season, Mets-Dodgers, and we know what happened in the NLCS, do you really think to this day, to your grave, that the Dodgers were better than the Mets? Well, that's how I feel about the Celtics-Knicks series here in 2025. And you cannot change my mind. I don't care what you say. Yes, the Knicks did win. Fair and square. No cheating. No controversial foul calls. I get that. But because it's so new and it's so fresh, of course it's going to sting. But it's going to sting 20 years from now, even if the Celtics win the next 19 NBA Finals. But my point is that when we look back on this, people are going to really think about how in the hell did the Knicks win this series, considering 4-0 in the regular season against the Knicks and 10 games ahead of them in the standings. And again, it is still mind-boggling to think that they lost this series, and I got to sit with this from now until my dying day. And until my dying day, I will always believe that the Celtics were much better, even without Jason Tatum. Because let's face it, if the Celtics would have taken those 2 games, and when you add it all up, they were actually 3 shots away from winning the series in 5. 2 3-pointers in game 1, and a 3-pointer in game number 2, where, as we all remember, 25 from 100 from 3 in those first 2 games. So, based on that alone, they were the better team, and obviously they didn't shoot well and didn't execute, so therefore they're going to Cancun. Now, as far as the Celtics overall, of course the Tatum injury is going to hang over their heads for the next year. And as I said before, and I'll say one last time, until he is 100% cleared by the doctors, I don't want him coming back even next year. Let him sit the year. Because Achilles, even if he's 100% ready to go, psychologically, mentally, even spiritually, he's going to have to get over that hurdle when it comes to cutting, when it comes to just planting his foot a certain way, and that's going to be in the back of his mind. That's me from afar. And that goes for anybody, whether that was Kevin Durant when he took that whole year off after his final season in Golden State when he came to Brooklyn, or even a guy like Klay Thompson when he hurt his Achilles in the offseason, and now he had to rebound, and obviously he's not the same player, but you got to combine that with an ACL injury, I understand. Whether it's John Wall, now we're going to look at Damian Lillard here, and he's much older than Tatum on top of that. But this is an injury, as you all know, it's not one that after 8 months, even if he's cleared, he's going to be back to Tatum prior to this injury. We know it's going to take him getting into game shape, basketball shape, everything. And being able to cut, being able to do all the moves on a basketball floor that he's going to be 100% comfortable with. And you know that's going to take a lot of time and a lot of reps, no matter how much he practices and gets himself ready to play in an NBA game for the first time since he hurt himself in game 4. So to me, that's number 1. Number 2, what are they going to do with this roster? It remains to be seen. I know people are going to say maybe trade Jaylen Brown considering his contract and that he's still young and you could get a lot back for him. Me, I wouldn't do that just yet, because you still have guys that you could absolutely trade, in particular Kristaps Porzingis, and I get it. Right now, you're going to have to play him into next year, hopefully build up his stock as an expiring contract. You're going to have to take an expiring contract back, but it's one of those things where he's not going to be long for a Celtic, whether it be going into next year or sometime next year before the deadline. And with guys like Drew Holiday, with 3 more years left and $1 zillion, that's going to be an albatross to move. And one more time, if you do move that, you're going to have to take a guy's contract similar and maybe age at that matter on the way back. D. White stays. Peyton Pritchard, you gave an extension. I don't know about a lot of the other guys that you would think of. Al Horford, you would think he's going to retire. I wouldn't bring him back. And that's nothing against Al Horford. And I'm sure he played for the minimum. Maybe if you're playing for the minimum. But the thing is that unless you got a guy that's going to play 35 to 38 minutes a game, and not only that, on top of that, is going to remain healthy. Horford, at this stage of his career, he's best coming off the bench. He's not going to log big-time minutes anymore, 39, almost 40 years of age. So unless you could bring a guy that's going to guarantee that, and we all know there are no guarantees, then you can bring him back. And of course, he's going to be cheap. But how I look at it is that maybe it's just best to part ways, or who knows, he may end up retiring, which will settle that. But they have a lot of question marks. And of course, the Tatum injury is huge. So whether he does come back February, March, because the timetable is 8 to 12 months, and if he doesn't come back, how this team is going to shape up here based on what Brad Stevens does here in this offseason. And it's way too early to tell what they're going to do as far as trades, as far as signing players. We know the second apron's going to kick in. And obviously Tatum is starting the first of his 5-year, $314 million contract, which is another reason why I wouldn't rush him back, even if he does say, I don't care, I could cut, I could do this, I could jump, I could, because if he re-injures himself, not necessarily with the Achilles, but maybe a calf strain or an ACL, who knows, then you have 5 years with that contract hanging over your heads there for the course of the next half decade, and then on top of all that, you have the new ownership coming in. So who knows what they are looking to project as far as the team, roster, fiscally, more importantly, because of course they're well over the luxury tax. So you got a lot of questions that need to be answered. And how I would go about it, one more time, I'd keep Jaylen Brown. I mean, unless you get the Godfather offer of all time, So let's just say, for argument's sake, the Rockets are willing to part with Alperen Sengun and Jalen Green, and maybe they'll throw in a draft pick to bring Jaylen Brown back, because again, the money has to match up, and I get it. Going the other way, Jaylen Brown's making $60 million a year. Do the Rockets want to invest that much in a guy like Jaylen Brown? Well, the one thing you'd have to think of is that the head coach was his former head coach for the 1 year in Boston in 2022, that being Ime Udoka. So maybe there could be a match there where they could get young players and picks back, and I get it. Maybe they don't want to give up their youth, even as bad as Jalen Green had played, but Sengun is certainly a guy that has tremendous upside. I'm just throwing that out there. That's not a rumor. That was something I got to give credit to my brother Justin on. But with that being said, is that a direction where maybe the Celtics would go to try to bring back young players, and maybe once Tatum comes back, where you have Tatum, Sengun, Green to go along with possibly Holiday and even Derek White? That will have to wait, but it's a big offseason for the Celtic team, knowing that next year, I don't want to say they're going to be in purgatory, but they're certainly not going to be one of the beasts of the East, especially as of right this very moment. So we'll have to unpack it all as we get deeper into this postseason, and obviously once the finals conclude, into the offseason and where they're going to go here, whether it be for a stopgap or a longer-term solution, bringing in young guys for, let's say, Jaylen Brown, who, one more time, I wouldn't trade. Porzingis, I'd say goodbye. Horford, I think he would go off into the sunset, and if not, I'd make sure I'd bring somebody back to play power forward and then bring Horford back on a one-year deal just to come off the bench. I would do that. And who knows what Holiday, I don't want to trade him. He says he wants to stay here. But with that being said, he's probably going to stay here considering the money, unless the new ownership says, we got to do our best to pair some of this payroll. And he may be the first to go because his contract is a lot more than Derek White. And White is younger, etc., and plays very good defense, as you know. So you have that to deal with. But now let's get past the Celtics. Let's go on to the conference finals. And this is where I'm going to start off here before I even get to a preview of those two matchups. Adam Silver, as of right this very moment, as he's maybe opening up a newspaper, has his coffee and croissant, and as he looks ahead tomorrow night, Minnesota at Oklahoma City, followed by Wednesday night at the Garden between the Pacers and Knicks, and I don't want to hear it, between he and anybody else down on Fifth Avenue in their headquarters, they are hoping, praying, begging, and pleading the basketball gods to have the New York Knicks in the NBA Finals. And if they tell you otherwise, they are big, fat liars. That's all there is to it. The Knicks in the Finals, forget about just New York, the market itself, but just the Knicks, who have not been to an NBA Finals since 1999, have not won a championship since 1973. The fan base is out of their gourd. If you haven't watched any of the clips or highlights, I've seen it, so I don't need to be reminded of it. But with all that being said, they can talk about, Indiana, they're a complete team, they're this, they're that. It's going to be, certainly they'll be representative of the Eastern Conference. They would say, give us the Knicks right now if I have to sign it in my own blood, if that was Adam Silver. So I'm going to start off there. So whether you have Knicks, T-Wolves, which I know would be very sexy because of the trade right before the season started with Karl-Anthony Towns coming here and Dante DiVincenzo and Julius Randle going over there. And to have the trade, which has worked out for both teams to this point, and especially Julius Randle's been just otherworldly here, especially in the last round against the Warriors. But for that matchup, and I think OKC New York would be great, despite the fact that the Knicks were 0-2 against them. But I'm sure they're going to look at what happened with the Celtics, how they were 0-4 going into that series, and if they do play Oklahoma City in a final, they'll probably use that as incentive or motivation for them to get over that hump and win an NBA title. But any one of those two matchups I think would be fine. The last one that they would want to see would be Indiana-Minnesota. And I understand it's still Anthony Edwards and you have some star power there. But to me, an Indiana-Minnesota, and even to a certain extent Indiana-OKC, but the only reason why I say OKC because they did have the best record in the sport, and they do have, which hasn't been announced yet, and I guess they had to wait until this series was over, the MVP. All the other awards have been announced, Coach of the Year, Defensive Player of the Year, Rookie, etc. But we're still waiting on the MVP, which is usually announced in the second round. But because they were going head-to-head, I guess they didn't want to use that as a distraction or maybe motivation, that if one guy won it over the other, then... And I think that's probably what it was. But now you have a situation where you would think Shai Gilgeous-Alexander is going to get the MVP award at some point this week. So therefore, the MVP going up against the Knicks team, that would certainly be, or excuse me, against Indiana, that I'm sure will bring eyeballs to the sets. But anything less than the Knicks being there, it's going to be Arizona, Texas in the World Series 2 years ago for the NBA. That's all there is to it. It may attract the casual fan because it's, all right, thank God, there are no Lakers, there are no Celtics, there are no Warriors, there are no teams like that aren't there. So therefore, they may be refreshed to see an Indiana and Minnesota or Indiana OKC. New York, they may be, but because they haven't been around there in forever, maybe they will gravitate to that, and I think they will. But anything less than that, to me, the NBA will fool themselves to think that, oh yeah, we're happy about Pacers and T-Wolves or Pacers and Thunder. That is nonsense in my eyes, so you can forget about that. Now, as far as the games itself or the series, I'll start off with Minnesota, Oklahoma City. Now, with Minnesota getting their rest and Oklahoma City jumping right into the fire, although they do have the home court, I think this is Oklahoma City. I wouldn't be surprised if it goes less than 7. I'm sure a lot of people are going to pick a 7-game series. Now, Anthony Edwards, I know he's beaten all these players and teams along the way dating back to last year, whether it was Kevin Durant, whether it was Nikola Jokic last year, this year, LeBron and Luka, as well as now no Steph Curry, although he did play in game 1 but left in the second quarter. You want to say Jimmy Butler, Draymond? Not this guy. But now, let's see. Deep end of the pool, Oklahoma City, I think it's going to be an uber competitive series. I would not be surprised if Minnesota even steals this first game because with the 48-hour turnaround, and even though it was a blowout, but I'm sure a lot of the oxygen had left the room, and now they got to ratchet it up again where Minnesota, if they're going to pick off, at least in this first game, they're going to have to do so in game 1. And that's not to say they can't win game 2, but I think overall, Oklahoma City will find a way to win this series in 6 games because I think as much as it was a test for them to try to win in Denver in 6 games, which they didn't, but knowing that it wasn't a tooth and nail, scratch and claw, 15-round heavyweight fight, that it came down to the wire, knowing that the game was pretty much over at the half, and obviously it was a scenario where the Thunder could put their feet up and look ahead to the next round. And I'm sure they know what's at stake. Anthony Edwards, Rudy Gobert, Julius Randle playing unlike Julius Randle that we've ever seen. But I think they're going to, and I wouldn't be surprised if it goes 7, but I really think that they're going to try to neutralize their best at getting to Anthony Edwards because we all know the defense that the players that they could put in, the defense that they could put on Anthony Edwards. Now, he's going to get his points, he's going to get his shots, etc. But I'm sure they're going to do whatever it takes to try to frustrate him, to try to double team when you have guys like Lou Dort and Kason Wallace and Jalen Williams. And, I mean, they have a very deep team defensively. So you know they're going to throw everything and the kitchen sink towards Edwards. And let's say if Julius Randle, let's see him duplicate what he did in the previous round against the Warriors. So that's how I look at it. So considering that Edwards may get his points, but is he going to get his points on 18 attempts or is he going to get his points on 28 attempts? Because if he scores 35 and 28 attempts, that's probably going to bode well more for OKC than him getting 35 at 18 attempts. So I'm going to say that the Thunder win in 6, but it could go 7, but I'll say 6. And as far as Indiana and the Knicks go, now, of course, the Knicks have a lot of gas in their tank. They're flying. We know the whole deal. Pacers, they've been resting. They're going to have 8 days off from the last time they played. We're going to see if the rest turned into rust. And you know that Garden crowd is going to be frenzy. Now, everybody's going to look back to last year, how the Knicks are going to exact revenge from that second round that they lost to the Pacers there in the conference semis. And, of course, Brunson, who hurt his thumb or broke his hand there toward the end of the first half and did not come out in the second half. And, therefore, the Knicks just withered away as the Pacers went out to a, 130-109 win in Game 7. Well, they could have won in Game 6. Now, that's the one thing. All the Knicks fans want to say, oh, yeah, we lost in 7 with no Brunson. Well, you're up 3-2 going to Indiana, and you could have won that game, but obviously you didn't. So I don't want to hear about the Game 7 scenario. But as far as this series, this is going to go 7. without question, because the Pacers, although I like them, I think they're a little bit deeper, and I think they have a better coach as well. Now, they don't have the one-star player like the Knicks do, and even though Brunson is a star, he's not a top 10 player, but he's one guy that I know I could trust more so Tyrese Halliburton or even Pascal Siakam, who's won a title in Toronto. But I think when it's all said and done, I think the Pacers, they're going to win one game at the Garden, and I think that game could be Game 7. Now, they'll probably have to end up winning 2, because whether in games 1 or 2 or game 5, they have to win one game at the Garden in order for them to win the series, because it just can't be a home court series. If so, the Knicks are going to go on to a final. But I think they're going to have to win 2 games. So whether that be try to catch the Knicks here in game 1, and then maybe down the road, whether it be game 7 in particular, because if they do win in game 1 and game 5, then you would think, depending on how the series could go, they could actually close out the Knicks in 6. But I'm going to say 7. Whether or not they get game 1, 2, or 5, that right now I can't really answer. But they do know they can win in that building, even without Brunson. I get it. But I think they're going to find a way. I was actually close to picking Pacers in 6. But the more I think about it, I think it's going to be a 7-game series. And I think Indiana will find a way. I think they'll try to wear down Brunson as much as they possibly can, i.e. last year. And even though that hand injury, I believe he banged his hand against his thigh, which caused the break. And I don't know if that's going to be a scenario where they're going to try to wear him down in the early part. And I would think they would try from the jump to try to wear him out. We know how brilliant he is as far as trying to generate contact with his pump fakes and his footwork, etc. And this isn't an anti-Nick pick. This is just me thinking that the Pacers have a couple more options off the bench. I like TJ McConnell. He's a very gritty player. Benedict Mathurin, who knows if he's going to flex his muscle and throw some physicality as long as he keeps his head on straight. Obi Toppin is a guy that can get some points and can surprise you at times. And obviously he's a former Knick. So how I look at it is, I think the Pacers with Halliburton, Siakam, Miles Turner, they'll find a way. And I think they have overall just better talent than the Knicks do, and a better coach. And that's why I'm going to pick the Pacers to win in 7. I know it's unpopular. I know a Knicks fan's going to get at me, and you know what? I could care less. So what? So that's what we have there with the NBA. And let me see if I have anything else to discuss there with the association. No, that's pretty much it as we break it down. Now, quickly, I want to talk about the WNBA. Because if you recall last year, I did say that I was going to invest a little bit more time in talking about the women's hoops. And I know the season started Saturday, and I didn't have any previews or any predictions or anything like that, because again, here I am. I could go through all the rosters and watch preseason games. I don't even watch NBA, NFL, hockey, or baseball preseason games. So I'm not going to start with the WNBA. So, but what I'm going to do there, though, this year is that I'm going to follow from afar and slowly but surely, especially once we get past the fall and winter sports and get more into the WNBA. Now, am I going to watch every second of every minute? Absolutely not. But I did take notice of the banner raising at Barclays for the Liberty, who finally won their first WNBA championship last year. Remember, they've been to 5 previous title games or title series and were 0-5, and then they beat the Minnesota Lynx, as you know, in 5 games. So they raised the banner there. Spike Lee, everybody was in tow. All right, fine. But the Liberty, I would think that maybe they have a good shot to defend their title. Again, I don't know. I'm not reading WNBA preseason predictions or anything like that, but I'm going to follow along and see and try to gravitate toward the New York team, even though that's not really my penchant to hop on board for New York teams. A la just look at my prediction here for the conference finals in the NBA. But with that being said, I'll make sure to keep an eye to follow as we get throughout the course of the season. And I know you already had some controversy with Angel Reese and Caitlin Clark. I saw the foul that she had there under the basket. Yeah, it was a flagrant. Yeah, it was a bit hard. But for Reese to get up and right away approach her, and we know that this goes back to college, their rivalry. And then last year they had a bit of a scuffle there and a lot of hateful comments toward Angel Reese. I mean, people, please, can we stop with the nasty comments as I read there yesterday? And who knows, that's going to be the WNBA rival, Chicago, Indiana, as they start their season there on Saturday. And they already have the dust-up between the two players. So who knows what kind of carryover that's going to have on for the remainder of the year. I don't know when their next game is going to be played between Chicago and Indiana. I would think the next game will be in the Windy City, considering they opened up the season at Indiana. And although I did read that Indiana could have a good shot, now mind you, they barely got in through the back door in the playoffs last year, but then I believe they lost in the first round. So for them, maybe their ceiling's a little bit higher. Maybe they could get not only to a playoff, but maybe have a run in them. Here I am talking WNBA basketball like if I know anything. But again, this is just what I've gathered here over the last few days. So between Chicago and Indiana, who knows? That could be a rivalry for years to come just based on the two players and their history between one another. Of course, like I mentioned, dating back to college with LSU and Iowa for Reese and Clark, respectively. And again, I'm not going to give you a prediction. I'm not going to break down every team, what's going to happen, who's going to make the playoffs, etc. But I will keep an eye, I will watch, I will follow as we move it along here and bring you up to speed on what's happening there with the women's game as far as the hoops go. All right, now let me lace up my skates as we take a trip through the National Hockey League. And last night, I'll start there and go backwards. If you're a Toronto Maple Leaf fan, you've seen this movie before. And when I saw this stat, I was just mind blown to think that they have now the longest losing streak in NHL history, Stanley Cup playoff history. They have now lost 7 straight Game 7 playoff series. I mean, you can't make it up. And this is the Maple Leafs. This isn't the Ducks or the Nashville Predators, the Columbus Blue Jackets, none of those teams. Or even a team that's been around for quite some time. It's not the Penguins. Obviously, it's not the other original 6 teams, whether it be the Rangers, the Red Wings, Canadiens, etc. This is the Maple Leafs. And now another series goes poof as they win a Game 6 on the road in Florida where Austin Matthews, when it was tied going into the third at 0-0, and he scores the go-ahead and game-winning goal. They tacked on another goal later to ice the game. And the old Godfather saying, just when I was trying to get out, they reeled me back in. And as they go north of the border, tied at 3 games apiece after a big 2-0 win down in Sunrise, what happens? They come back home. They're down 3-0 into the third period. And then Max Domi scores a goal early third to make you think like, all right, which you knew was an enormous goal, because if the Panthers would have gotten the 4th goal, then that would have been it. As it was, 3-0 is insurmountable in the third period. I guess you can't say that for the Winnipeg Jets, as you saw what they did in the Game 7 in the previous series. But Max Domi scores the goal, and you're thinking to yourself, all right, maybe now this is where the Maple Leafs could maybe get the next goal and scramble for the final goals. They pull the goalie there late in the game. No, not even a minute, less than a minute later, the Panthers get on the board with another goal, make it 4-1, and that was it. The Panthers, the defending Cup champs, go on and win 6-1 to the chagrin of the Maple Leaf faithful. And all I'll say is this in regards to that team, it's not the coach. You let go of Sheldon Keefe after last year, and I get it. All the playoff foils. Yes, they did finally get past the first round 2 years ago, but still not getting deep into a postseason, considering that even this year, Toronto was first in their division at the 2 seed overall, and they would have had home ice, obviously playing against the Carolina Hurricanes, but that was not to be the case. Craig Berube stays. John Tavares, who is a free agent, if I'm the GM, I would not resign him. What is he now, 34? He's going to be 35 this year, or maybe 33. Nevertheless, that's it. Tavares gone, and not to say it's all on him, and obviously he didn't have a big series here against the Panthers, but I wouldn't bring him back, and I would seriously think about packaging either Mitch Marner or William Nylander. Either one of those two guys, or both for that matter. Now, if you really want to shake things up, you trade Austin Matthews. But I don't know if they would do that. I get it, Matthews, at least he got you to Game 7. And last night, obviously, was another no-show. And he's had many a no-show. I get that. But I would keep Matthews because he is your bona fide. He's a top 10 player in the sport, arguably top 5. So you won't let him go. But the Mitch Marners of the world, who, again, was just invisible in this series, especially deep in the series. And then on top of all that, William Nylander, who has had some moments in this postseason. But you know what? You got to shake things up. This team, with those 4 players in particular, have done absolutely nothing for you. So you know what? Shake it up. Bring players back. Even if you want to trade Austin Matthews, I couldn't blame him at this point. I wouldn't do that. But for Marner, Nylander, and Tavares, more so Marner and Tavares for sure. I mean, Tavares is a no-brainer. But Nylander, depending on what you get back, do it. The Maple Leafs have to start upending their personnel. That's all there is to it. It's not the coach. It is not. Berube was able to get you past the first round, and not to put it all on him, but now the second round, when these guys have not been able to string together games where they could be consistent as far as their goal scoring, as far as just putting points on the board, etc., and they haven't done it. So to me, they have to shake it up big time in order for them to try to get to a conference final and beyond. So that's what I would do if I was the Maple Leaf GM. Then you have the Winnipeg Jets. And I know this may be tough because I was ready to pounce and just destroy them as a 1 seed. And I get it. President Trophy winners do not go on to win Stanley Cups, as evidenced just in the last 20 years. 2002, in a full season where the Detroit Red Wings won a President's Trophy and beat the Carolina Hurricanes in that Stanley Cup season. And then in 2013, albeit a lockout season, where the Blackhawks won the President's Trophy and then beat the Bruins, as you know, in 6 games. Those are the only 2 times in this century that a team has won the President's Trophy and won the Stanley Cup. And the reason why I had to differentiate that, because in a shortened season, the Blackhawks did it, which was the last time it happened in the NHL. But prior to that, in a full season, so you got to go back 23 years, the last time a team that has played a full season won the President's Trophy, and in that same year won a Stanley Cup. And with the Jets this year, didn't happen. Now, after a Game 4, which I'm sure had all the Jet fans geeked up, a shutout there, Connor Hellebuck, who maybe gained some confidence there and actually played well the other night. So this isn't all on him. But you do have a scenario where Mark Scheifele, their longtime player, father suddenly passed away, I believe the night before the game, or Game 6, I should say, which was Saturday night. And not only did he play the game, scored a goal, but then late in the third period was called for a penalty, which led into the overtime. And then in overtime, Thomas Harley gets the game winner on the power play, and the series winner at that, where the Stars prevail 2-1, win the series in 6. And yes, would it be easier for me to pound the Jets right now, considering that everything they did this regular season, and as much as I've talked about here over the last few weeks, and literally on the cusp of extinction to the Blues in the previous round, I could, but you know what? I'll be nice. I'll lay off, and you know me. I'm like a junkyard dog when it comes to my analysis, opinions, etc. But because of Scheifele losing his dad, and you saw that during the handshake, where Scheifele getting a lot of hugs, a lot of respect, players paying respect to him and his dad passing away. And I know that had to be just I mean, how could you play in a game 24, 30, 36 hours after your dad passes? I mean, excruciating. I mean, that's all the only way to put it. And to think that he actually contributed to them at least being tied, and then unfortunately to their loss as well. And your heart goes out to him. I mean, there isn't anything that else you could add, you could say. It was just a terrible time for Mark to have to go through the grieving of his dad in the process of trying to play in a Game 6, and then on top of all that, to have the penalty, and the only penalty of the game I might add, which all of a sudden puts the Stars with the man advantage. I get it. They only had 15 seconds left in the third period that went into overtime, and then in overtime they get the goal. And now Dallas moves on to play the Edmonton Oilers, and I'll get to that in a second, as they'll play for the second time in back-to-back years, and the third straight for the Stars, I might add, because they lost to Vegas a couple of years before in the Western Conference Final. But I have to round out the hockey with this, because Carolina, Washington, Game 5 in the nation's capital, and the Carolina Hurricanes, after trading goals there, I believe in the first period, and then you get deep into the third period where Andrei Shevchnikov gets the goal with 1:59 to go, and then they add an empty netter, and they put the Capitals out in their misery. So I guess whatever I wouldn't have given to the Winnipeg Jets, I'm going to give to the Capitals. Now, this isn't to knock the Hurricanes by any stretch, because as I've said a million times, and I won't say it again, but we know that they are a very solid team. But if you're a 1 seed, and we've seen this happen a million times in the NHL, I understand that, I get it. But you had a magical season. A season that a lot of people didn't think you were going to be tops in the conference. And even though in a first round where obviously relatively easy for them, as they got past the Canadiens, and then now here it was, tied at 1, they go to Carolina, they lose the 2 games there, and then they come back home and lose a game 5. Listen, NHL, the bounce of a puck, a power play, freak occurrence, anything can happen. And I understand, give credit to the Hurricanes, but for the Capitals to lose that series, I'm sorry. That is going to be a long summer. And even though Alexander Ovechkin did say he's going to come back for his 21st season, I'm sure he wants to get to 900 goals and beyond when it comes to his career. But I don't know if the Capitals are going to get back to that same spot next year, having the top seed. And who knows, maybe if they're middle of the pack, maybe they'll go on a run and win the Stanley Cup like they did 7 years ago. But that was just a tough way to end their season. I don't care how you slice it. And for the Capitals, I know that they could applaud themselves and say, wow, nobody expected us to do this. And with Alex getting the all-time goal-scoring record, to me, that just would have been the cherry on top if they would have had a Stanley Cup run in front of them. And obviously, they didn't even get to a conference final, let alone a Stanley Cup final. So for that, I have to get on them. But you know what? The Hurricanes played well. They were fantastic. And now, as I get right to it, with the conference finals, now, just like I did with the NBA commissioner, Adam Silver, I have to do the same for the NHL, for Gary Bettman and the powers that be. Where are they? 200 Park Avenue, I believe. Now, you know, I'm sorry. We get it, there are no original 6 teams left, which obviously if you're going to have a scenario where it's, let's say, Toronto, Detroit, Rangers, Red Wings. Now, you only have one representative, as crazy as this is, and obviously the Red Wings are nowhere to be found. Red Wings do play out in the West, so the only Stanley Cup final you would get from the West out of the original 6 would be Detroit. Now, I get it, it's all moot, but my point is that you don't have any of the original 6 teams there, or you don't have another team that you would think that is going to be as sexy toward the top in the NHL, more so out west than the East. But you do have Edmonton standing there. And Dallas, I get it. If Dallas gets to a final, okay, you'll live with it. Because they have been steady. They have been a team that's represented in the Western Conference Final over the last 3 years. But you know damn well that the commissioner is hoping, praying for the Carolina Hurricanes to not make it to a Stanley Cup Final. I know right now he would say, give me Florida and Edmonton again for a rematch. Now, for the hockey fan, they may say, do we really want to see that again? We saw it last year. Maybe they want to see Florida-Dallas for the hockey fan. Maybe they want to see Dallas get back to a final, considering they've been close. They made it the year of the pandemic when they lost to Tampa, and since then, conference final after conference final, now here they are back in the conference final. Can they get over the hump? And especially after last year when they lost Edmonton, let's see. But me personally, I'd rather see Edmonton, Florida again. I want to see Connor McDavid to try to get to the Holy Grail and win a Stanley Cup. Because that guy, as great as he's been, he needs to have a Stanley Cup ring in his back pocket. And for Florida, they're on the verge of going to 3 straight finals, which will be a carbon copy of what their rivals up the state did in 2020, 21, and 22. So who knows? You may have another Stanley Cup final with a Florida team for 6 straight years. But I'll talk about that in a second. As far as the matchups go, I'm sure if you put truth serum in Gary Bettman, he would take Florida Edmonton first, only because of McDavid and the star power. Florida Dallas second. And then I know Edmonton Carolina is not going to bring up visions of the 2006 Stanley Cup final, which did go 7 games, I might add. And Edmonton was an 8 seed that year. Look it up. But no fan is going to think back to that series, despite it going 7 games, as one that they're going to want to revisit. And Carolina Dallas, I don't think anybody, you can draw flies, or at least I'd be lucky to draw flies to watch that. So Gary Bettman, I'm sure he wants to have at least Edmonton, Florida for starters. You know he's going to bring out the pom-poms no matter what, even if it is Carolina Dallas. But I would think Edmonton, Florida would be the finals matchup that he would want to see more so than anyone else. And by the way, the last time that you had 2 teams play in back-to-back Stanley Cup finals was the 08-09 seasons when Detroit and Pittsburgh played. That was when Detroit won that first cup in 08. And then the next year, the Penguins, when all the home teams won the first 6 games, but the Penguins won on the road in Detroit for Crosby and company to get their first cup. So that's the last time, just for those wondering, if Edmonton and Florida do match up again in this final. Now, as far as the series goes, tomorrow night, Florida, Carolina. I'm rooting big time for Florida. I do not want to see Carolina in the final. But you know what? Maybe they'll exact some revenge after getting swept in the conference final 2 years ago by the Panthers. And I think this will be a competitive series. I think it'll go more than 4 games. I can see the Panthers winning in 6. I don't know if it'll go 7. Carolina does have the home ice in this round. And I have to see who has the home ice in the following round, if that's the case. That we'll worry about down the road. But for Carolina, listen, they are stout, they are competitive, and they're indicative based on their head coach, who was a grinder as a player and a one Rod Brindamore. But how could you go against Florida at this stage of the postseason? Unless injury happens, or Carolina, who they're not going to blow you away by their goal scoring. Yes, they're a team that's forecheck, backcheck, paycheck. The old saying there when it comes to the NHL. And yes, they're going to be able to try to capitalize on the other team's mistakes. But the thing is, the Panthers play that same brand of hockey. And they have better goal scoring and players that have delivered in big-time spots. That's why I have Carolina not winning the series and having Florida win in 6. And as far as Edmonton-Dallas, we know about Edmonton's firepower. We know about Dallas and how they've played. And although I'm rooting hard for Edmonton, but back in October, prior to the start of the season, I picked a Dallas Ranger final. So because I picked Dallas, I'm going to have to stick with them, only just based on me having them come out of the West. So if that's going to be the case, I'm going to say the Stars in 7. Although I can see Edmonton winning a Game 7 in that building, and I could surely see Edmonton winning in 6. So my heart will say Edmonton in 6, but because of my head and what I bet, not really bet, but what I predicted back last October, I'm going to say Dallas in 7. And any other news and notes in the league? No, that's pretty much it when it comes to the NHL. I don't know of any coaches. Was there a coach that was hired? If I forgot, I'll bring it up on Thursday's podcast and I'll break it down, because obviously I got a lot of other things to get to, including baseball as I get into the batter's box. And we know that it was a big weekend in the Bronx where Juan Soto made his return. First time in Yankee Stadium. Now, I have some bad news. I went to Yankee Stadium prior to the start of the series, and I wanted to go prior. I didn't want to go prior to Saturday or last night's game because I wanted to get the feel of the fan before they got into the stadium. And we knew what the reception was going to be like. There was no shock there. But because I got to the outside of the Yankee Stadium later than I wanted to, and a lot of the fans were going into the building, so I tried to stop them on the way, and they weren't. And not only that, there was a lot of activity outside. Nothing of anything that was felonious or of the misdemeanor-like. but let's just put it this way, there were clouds of smoke everywhere prior to going into the building. So even though I tried to interact with those fans, but they were in a haze. But with that being said, I didn't get any footage of the Yankee fan or even some Met fans and to get their feeling of the Subway Series, and more in particular, Juan Soto and his return to the Bronx. And it was everything that was advertised. You love how Soto played to the boos in his first at-bat, tipping his helmet, which I loved. Him going to the outfield where the bleacher creatures out there turned their backs, which I laughed, and I even posted on my YouTube channel at JAYREELZ, of course, and even on my socials, TikTok, Instagram, the JAYREELZ podcast, etc., where I just laughed at the Yankee fan. I said, what is it? Juan Soto's going to live rent-free in your head now for the next 15 years? I mean, it was an absolute joke what they did, and Soto handled it with aplomb and class. Now, it didn't really translate to what he did in the batter's box, as he went, 1 for, off the top of my head, I should know this, 1 for 14 with, I think, 4 walks in the series, or maybe he was 1 for, let me see. He was 0 for 2 or 3 walks on Friday, 1 for 4 with a walk on Saturday, and 0 for 4 yesterday. So 0 for 4, 1 for 1 for 8. So it was 1 for 10 for 4 walks. So he batted 100. He had a measly single and got robbed of a couple of hits in between. But he handled it gracefully, and the fans tried to get on his case, and who knows if that affected him in the batter's box. Who knows? Struck out a couple of times. But Soto had a lost weekend in the Bronx. What could you say, despite him not getting rattled by the fans out there in the bleachers or in the right field corner? Now, as far as the series overall, Tyler McGill walked the ballpark, was inefficient, 4 runs there in the 3rd inning, I believe. By the time I got home, I was on to the Knicks game. I was back and forth, Knicks Celtics, I should say. I was back and forth with that, so I didn't really get a good grasp of the game, but the Yankees went going away 6-2. All right, no big deal there. Saturday was a very good game. Nip and tuck. You got the 2 solo homers on the Yankee side, whether it was Cody Bellinger, who actually got the 2nd home of the game, and then DJ LeMahieu, who finally came back from the IL, got a home run in his return, and the Mets, who got a couple of late runs there, including the sac fly by Francisco Lindor in the 9th to get the go-ahead run, and then Edwin Diaz slammed the door and striking out Aaron Judge to close the game, so the series was split there. And then last night, as the Yankees, based on some bad fielding by the Mets, get out to a 2-0 lead. Mets get a run there in the 3rd. They also steal a run where they had a walk, where was it? It was a walk, stolen base, ground out, and then a wild pitch when Soto was up to score the tying run there. And even though the bullpen had to dodge some traffic there, bases loaded jams with Anthony Volpe up both times where he grounded out, then struck out in the 5th and 7th innings. But then the 8th inning, it all imploded on Ryan Stanek, had 2nd and 3rd. Next thing you know, Pete Alonso, who in the day before had a play at the plate when the game was tied, where they executed it nicely, but for whatever reason, with the speed of Jason Dominguez, he looked like Lucas Duda in Game 5 of the 2015 World Series where he threw it to the backstop. And that's when the floodgates opened up. That was 3-2. They got another run to make it 4-2. And then with the bases loaded, Cody Bellinger hit a grand slam to top off an 8-2 game in the 8th. So even though it looked like a blowout, but obviously it was 2-2 in the 8th. They scored 6 runs, and that was your game. So that was your Subway Series. All right, so the Mets didn't get embarrassed. They did get 1 win. I was hoping they would have gotten the game there last night, which would have been great. But they'll revisit over the 4th of July weekend at Citi Field, so we'll see how that goes down the road. So the Yankees take 2 out of 3 at the start of the Subway Series. And give it up for the Twins. Remember that winning streak we talked about at 10? Well, they continued until yesterday where they had won 13 straight. They had pitched 34 straight shutout innings, and you're thinking to yourself, where the hell did this come from if you're a Minnesota Twin fan? Well, the Brewers finally got a run there in the 2nd inning, and then they had a 4-2 lead in the 8th where Royce Lewis looked like he was about to tie the game in the top of the 8th with a 2-run homer, but got robbed by Jackson Chourio as he brought the ball back over the wall, and the Brewers tacked on another run in the bottom of the 8th, so they won 5-2 to snap that 13-game winning streak by the Twins, which was very impressive, and we talked about them on Thursday's podcast how they came all the way back. They were 13-20 was their record. And do the math, they were 26-20 before losing yesterday. And now that they've overtaken both the Guardians and Royals in the AL Central, but are still 5 games back of the Detroit Tigers, who the Tigers have been playing well, as you know, and right now have the best record in the American League at 31-16. We'll see when they go up against the big dogs, whether it be the Seattle, not to say they're a big dog, but considering that they're first in the AL West, and even the Yankees for that matter, when they play them down the road. So we'll keep an eye on that. But for the Twins, just a tremendous job to come all the way back from a 7 games from under 500 to now, where they were 6 games and now 5 games over. So tremendous job there by Rocco Baldelli, where a lot of people thought that his neck was going to be out in the chopping block for the Twins to fire him. And as it is, the Orioles have fired Brandon Hyde, their manager, and you can't put it all on him. The only reason why I'll say that, because what did the Orioles do in the offseason to fortify their roster, considering that Corbin Burns was a free agent? He signed with the Arizona Diamondbacks, and to replace Burns, they signed a 41-year-old Charlie Morton. Grayson Rodriguez, who has not thrown 1 pitch in the regular season this year, and who knows when he's going to come back. So you got to more or less blame the GM, Mike Elias, and the ownership, because this is an organization that has a lot of young players, and you would think is on the come up, where they have their championship window. It's not even cracked open after winning a division 2 years ago and making it into the playoffs last year without winning a playoff game in either of those 2 years. And now here they are. They sit at, get ready, 15-30. A team that was a division winner 2 years ago and won as a wild card team last year, or went in as a wild card team. And now they could be looking at the first pick in the draft. And I understand still the Rockies and the White Sox are just as bad as they are, but just a terrible performance here by the Orioles where they fired their manager. And maybe it's not all on Hyde, but they're not going to fire the GM or trade away players. So, you know, the manager's going to be the first to walk the plank. So undeserved maybe, but that's how it goes there in any sport when it comes to managers or coaches getting fired. Now, as I take a look at the baseball landscape, a big shock over the weekend was the Angels sweeping the Dodgers out of Dodger Stadium. What? LA Angels of Anaheim with the Shohei Ohtani go back to the Angels for a weekend? No, not the case. So give it up for the Angels as we talk about that AL West, which is ripe for the picking. And not to say the Angels are going to do anything, but considering that they went up the freeway and went into Dodger Stadium and broke out the brooms there to where the Dodgers were left with their heads spinning. Great job by them, although they're only 6 in the loss and 6 back of the Mariners in the AL West, but you wouldn't think that the Angels are going to do anything this year. But with another series against the Dodgers down the road, at least for right now, they can puff their chest out and say, yeah, at least we put a spanking on the defending champs and our rivals up the 405. So excellent job by them. So that was another big startling development there over the weekend. And then you also had Jose Alvarado, as if the Phillies need another relief pitcher on the shelf. He, the left-hander out of their bullpen, now suspended 80 games for PEDs. So you're not going to see the hard-throwing lefty there probably until August at the earliest. So he's going to be done. What the Phillies will do, a little bit too early to go at as far as maybe make a trade for a lefty. But you would think as we get deeper into the spring and into the early part of summer, they're going to try to bring in some reinforcements there to replace Alvarado, at least for the time being. So that we'll have to take a look at when we get to that point. But as far as the standings overall, and I'll get to the schedules this week to see what series we have to sink our teeth into. You have Yankees, who now have 5 game and 6 in a loss over the Red Sox. So now they got a little bit of separation. So that's something to keep in mind there for the Yankees, as they look like they're probably cruise to a division title. Now they'll play the Red Sox, I believe, the weekend after next. Let me think about that. I can look on the schedule. I know they play the Dodgers 2 weekends from this past weekend, because the Mets play the Dodgers this weekend at Citi Field. So the following weekend is Yankees-Dodgers, and I believe the weekend after that, that's when the Red Sox come to town. So that we'll have to look at. And the Red Sox are now 2 games under 500. That just goes to show you how weak the AL East is. Then we talked about the Central, how competitive they've been. And the Royals are now a game. Oh, no, they're 4 over 500. I'm sorry. I need my glasses here, people, if you're watching on YouTube or Spotify. But the Central in the AL, as you know, very competitive. Those teams, especially Twins, Guardians, Royals, all separated by half a game. And the AL West, where it's Mariners, Astros, and Rangers, all separated by 2.5. Then you have the Athletics and the Angels round out the AL West. Phillies are now tied in the loss. And just a half game behind the Mets. So keep that in mind there as they swept the Pirates over the weekend. So they're inching closer now, considering that the Mets lost 2 out of 3 to the Yankees, and they had a 2.5 game lead heading into the weekend. So now their first place lead is slipping, and the Mets go to Beantown up the I-95 corridor for the early part of this week. And they have a very interesting schedule. Dodgers come to town, so Mets are going to have a handful here over the next week. And even with the Red Sox, I know 2 games under, but still, watch the Red Sox all of a sudden get their energy boost with the Mets coming into town a little wounded after what happened in the Bronx over the weekend. And then you had the Braves finally over 500 as the Braves, who were in Boston over the weekend, and took 2 out of 3 of the Red Sox. So now that 0-7 start and them scuffling back, they are now over 500, so keep them in mind. Then in the Central, you have the Cardinals have still continued to play well, although the Reds have now won 4 in a row after them sweeping the Guardians over the weekend, as they are 5 in the loss with 4.5 back of the Cubs. Cardinals 2 back of the Cubbies. And then out west, even after that sweep, the Padres and Giants have now gotten closer, even though the Padres, they got swept by the Mariners. Think about that, where they actually could have overtaken the Dodgers this weekend, considering they got swept. But because they lost to the Mariners over the weekend, they are a game behind, but tied in the loss. The Dodgers are 29-18, Padres 27-18, where the Giants are 28-19, exactly 1 game behind the Dodgers in the division and 4 back. So a lot of competitiveness. To think the Yankees have the most separation out of all the teams in the sport. 5-game lead over the Red Sox, where no other team is even close to that. I think the only team that's close to that is what? Maybe the Tigers? Yeah, 5 back. So yeah, they're even. I thought maybe the 5.5 because I looked at both the Guardians and Royals at 5.5 back. So Tigers and Yankees getting separation, and the other teams are in first place, slimmest of margins by the Mets, and then you have the Cubs, slim margins in the NL West, AL West, etc. And as far as the schedule for the week is concerned, you have Cubs in Miami, Cincinnati at Pittsburgh. As you know, Mets, Red Sox, Houston at Tampa, Baltimore, Milwaukee, Cleveland at Minnesota. There you go. You got a good series there. That could be a 4-gamer. Seattle at the White Sox, Detroit at St. Louis, Philly, Colorado, KC, San Francisco, Angels at Athletics, Arizona at LA. I'll check to see if both of those series are 4-gamers. Yankees will host the Rangers here starting tomorrow. San Diego at Toronto is tomorrow. Atlanta at Washington. Those are the teams that are off today that did not play. And as far as are any of those series 4-gamers, let's take a look. No, Cleveland will be at Detroit for a 4-game series starting Thursday. So that's a 3-game series against Minnesota. And then Arizona at LA. That is also a 3-game series. So that's what you have here in the early part of the baseball week as we head into Memorial Day, which is a week from today, as we all know. So just keep that in mind when we get to that point, as we'll unpack the baseball season in full depth at that time to see where teams may go, contenders, pretenders, that sort of thing. Now let me put the helmet and shoulder pads on for the NFL and just one big news-worthy item that I can discuss. Excuse me, that being Brock Purdy, the latest quarterback to sign a big-time contract, and we knew that this was going to come down the pike. We knew this was going to be a scenario where Brock Purdy was going to get the big payday, considering a lot of players, the purge that it went on in San Francisco, the Deebo Samuels, and the Dre Greenlaws, a lot of other players to boot on top of that. But for Brock Purdy, 5 years, $265 million. I don't know what the guaranteed money is. Probably in the 180s, whatever it may be. But of course, begs the question, is he worth that money? And considering we're probably never going to see the likes of this particular development, a guy who is Mr. Irrelevant, the last pick in the 2022 NFL Draft, to become a starter on a team that went to an NFC Championship game before he hurt his elbow in that game against the Eagles, and then to become the starter the year after to take his team to a Super Bowl and actually come this close. He was a 3rd and 4 conversion deep in the fourth quarter to where if they would have converted it, they would have taken 3 knees, run out the clock, kicked the field goal, won a Super Bowl, and Brock Purdy from one year to the next would have been a hero. A guy who was the last pick in the NFL draft in 2022 to become a Super Bowl and maybe arguably a Super Bowl MVP. So I don't think you're ever going to see this as long as I'm alive, or maybe anybody alive, that you're going to have a guy who's going to be drafted as a quarterback, because a linebacker, wide receiver, safety, you name it, is not going to get anything close to what a quarterback will make, and in this particular case, Brock Purdy. And congratulations. The market is the market. He got what the market dictates. And quarterbacks, they're going to get paid in upwards of $50 million a year. But we all damn well know that Brock Purdy is not worth that money. Sorry. I know he's had success. I know he's played well. I know he's taken his team to a Super Bowl, another one to a championship game last year. And I get it. Injuries and not having the Brandon Ayuk's of the world and Trent Williams out. And I get that. But now he's going to face some big-time pressure. And I understand under Kyle Shanahan and that system, and with him being that system quarterback where he doesn't have to make deep throws or make the throw that's going to be in a window where it's going to be tight. We know his offense is going to be quick throws, quick passes, get the ball out of his hands quickly system. And we understand if you put him on the Chiefs, will he have that same success there that he would if he was in San Francisco? Probably not. But that's where the market value, and that's where he's going to get this kind of money. Because you mean to tell me that he, along with Tua Tagovailoa, Trevor Lawrence, Justin Herbert, even Jordan Love for that matter, who are making well over $50 million a year, those guys aren't in the same stratosphere as Joe Burrow, Josh Allen, Lamar Jackson, Patrick Mahomes. They're not. So those aforementioned four who have either won Super Bowls or won MVPs, obviously you can look at them and say, all right, I can see them making $50 million a year. But just going on the history, Tua with his concussions, Trevor Lawrence being a number one pick overall coming out of Clemson where everybody thought he was going to be the next big thing, has been anything but. All right, he won a playoff game, but that was more an indictment on the Chargers having a 27-0 lead than him winning the game. Despite the fact they won the game, all right, give him credit, but still, 27-0, that's a game you should lose. And it was in their building. And then speaking of which, of the Chargers, Justin Herbert, who was in that game, up 27-0, couldn't deliver. And yes, you got to have all the talent in the world, best pass, touch pass, rocket arm, 0-2 in the postseason. Those guys aren't going to be worth that money. So where you're Allen, Mahomes, Burrow, and Jackson, all right, we understand. Those guys are going to get that money. But the other guys, and include Brock Purdy in that mix, there's no way, shape, or form that those guys belong in the same stratosphere as the other quad that I mentioned just a moment ago. But, hey, I'm not hating. I'm just giving you my analysis and my opinion on it. Because I'm sure I am not alone in assessing what Brock Purdy got. We get it. Market value. But is he worth that money? Not this guy. Now, lastly, let me get to the golf as I break out the driver and go over the PGA, which I have to make two confessions. Number one, I guess based on what happened with the Masters last month, and granted it was last month, I get it, whatever it was 5 weeks ago, and the euphoria of that with Rory, etc., I wasn't really pumped up for this PGA. And as we know, the PGA in the pecking order is fourth when it comes to the major Grand Slam tournaments. So, yeah, I didn't go into this tournament with any enthusiasm or getting jacked up to be like, wow, that was a great Masters. Let's see what's going to happen here at the PGA. I did not. And based on that leaderboard after the first day, I looked at that and said, who are these guys? Who is Jonathan Vegas? Who are, I should say, who are guys such as Ryan Gerard or Ryan Fox or Siwoo Kim or Aaron Rai? I mean, these are guys that if they would have fell on me, I wouldn't know who they were. But those are the guys at the top of the leaderboard there in the first couple of days. And then after Friday, I thought to myself, I said, oh my goodness, if this is going to be what it is come Sunday, I mean, who's going to watch this thing? Well, as it was, Scottie Scheffler finally turned it on there on Saturday, where he got himself to the top of the leaderboard heading into Sunday, as well as Bryson DeChambeau, as well as Max Homa, and even Jonathan Vegas was still there, one stroke behind, and it made for some fascinating theater, considering that after Saturday's third round, you had Scheffler, who was tied with Siwoo Kim, and then you had DeChambeau and Jonathan Vegas, one stroke behind them going into the final round. So, all right, you got Bryson there, final round, similar to what we saw there at the Masters with him and Rory. And with Scheffler, who had won the Byron Nelson a couple of weeks ago, and a lot of people thought was going to be the favorite. For a split second, I thought about him, but I picked Cam Smith, and Cam Smith was nowhere to be found. Didn't even make the cut. But for Scheffler, who was going into this as a guy that looked like it was going to finally get a major outside of Augusta, which I talked about on Thursday when I previewed it, because we know he won the two major tournaments in his career at Augusta, including last year when he won. And of course, you think back to the PGA a year ago where he got arrested on his way to the tournament. And even though that altercation that he had with a cop, he got released and therefore ended up playing and was pretty cool in that second round. And in the third round, it kind of went away. And even though he didn't just belly up, but certainly maybe was a little bit rattled by what took place there with that incident regarding the cop, and obviously trying to be as cool, calm, and collected, etc. But he bounced back in that from that PGA to this one, where in the first couple of rounds laying in the weeds, and then obviously coming out there at the top of the leaderboard after the third round. And then when you get into the final round, now he has a situation where Jon Rahm is all of a sudden gaining some ground, to the point where they were tied at the top of the leaderboard after Rahm at 9, when they were both 9 under. And now you're going to have a mano-a-mano Scheffler, Rahm, who Rahm has not really played well here in these major tournaments over the last couple of years, pretty much since he went to LIV toward the end of 2023, I believe. So he hasn't really been on any leaderboards in the major tournaments since that time. And here he is now looking like it's going to be a mano-a-mano Royal Rumble there to see who's going to come out on top. And then Rahm from 13, where he didn't sink a birdie putt, and then on 14 had a chance, but went par, and then 16, 17, and 18, he just went off the rails. On 17, hitting a ball in the drink, double bogeying, even on the last hole. It was just an absolute mess by Rahm, where a lot of people were hoping for some drama and hoping to see whether or not Rahm, in a back-and-forth duel against Scheffler, who was trying to get that elusive next major after the Masters, and just went poof off into the distance, where Scheffler actually had a very good back nine, got birdies, was able to make some clutch putts there, and went going away, winning by 5 strokes, as Scheffler, who was just exuberant by the win. I'm sure he probably thought about last year, although it wasn't on that course, but considering what took place there at the PGA last year and how everything unfolded with the cop and trying to get that back-to-back after winning the Masters, as you know, and for him to not only win the PGA, but also win outside of Augusta, I'm sure that had to be a big relief. Because a lot of people looked at Scheffler as a guy that we know, number 1 golfer in the world, is a phenomenal player, wins a lot of these tournaments outside of the Grand Slams, but we want to see him win a Grand Slam. And all right, it may not be the US Open. All right, it may not be the British, or now called the Open Championship, which I'm sure he's going to get to tee up there Father's Day weekend next month. But you have to admit, for him to get off that schneid, I'm sure that was a big release and a relief for Scheffler as he wins his third major overall and obviously his first PGA. And then even on top of that, and this is I said I had two confessions here. The first one being that I didn't really follow it. Now, I did follow it once Scheffler got near the top, I got to admit, because at that point, I'm like, whoa, now I got to really pay attention, because the Jonathan Vegases and the Siwoo Kims and the guys that I mentioned, they're not going to move the needle. I mean, let's face it. I don't care if they had a 50-stroke lead and were putting up record numbers. Those guys aren't household names. I'm sorry. But when Scheffler got to the top of the leaderboard and Bryson DeChambeau was a stroke behind him, I said, uh-oh, now I got to be on top of it. So therefore, that was my confession number one about the PGA. My second confession is this. I liked it that the PGA moved from August to May, because then you had that succession of the major tournaments from April through July. But is there any way, mea culpa, can we put the PGA back to August? For this reason. It is a Grand Slam, you got to admit, but it's not the tournament that is cracked up to be a la the Masters, the US Open, or even the Open Championship. And to have it in August when there's nothing going on in sports, because think about it, you're deep into the baseball season, the dog days of August. I understand NFL preseason games, if anybody's wrapped up in that, is Wimbledon will be at the end of June. US Open tennis is at the end of August, so it's not going to interfere. So that's the best time to have it, because when there's nothing really happening, we want to have something that we could gravitate to. To where in the middle of May, when we're watching Celtics, Knicks, now I understand it's at nighttime when the golf's in the day, but there's so much going on between, at least this weekend. You had the NBA with OKC and Denver going 7 games. You had the scenario with the NHL with the Maple Leafs going 7 games. Obviously the Subway Series. You got so much happening for those who are into the WNBA, that in the middle of the day as well. So can you please move the PGA back to August, just so you can extend the golf season, number one, and number two, have something for us fans to really wrap our arms around as you get through the month of August, where at least it's a major tournament. We could certainly attract ourselves to watching that, or at least follow it from afar, as opposed to May, where now you have 2 more events left, and by the time you get to the middle of July, that's it, your golf season's over. Now, I understand you have the Ryder Cup at the end of the year, and that's not a major, but a lot of people will pay attention to that, but you don't really have anything else for golf going on. Where if you had it in August, this year you'd have that, and then 5 or 6 weeks later, you'd have the Ryder Cup. So in essence, the golf season ends when you get to the middle of July. So I just thought to throw that out there as a mea culpa, where years ago when they shifted it from August to May, I was all for it. Now, can we revert it back, please? I'd appreciate it. Now, a couple other things before I go. Jordan Spieth, who is trying to make history in his own right. A guy who has won the Masters, the US Open, and the Open Championship, and hasn't won a major tournament since 2017. All he needed was the PGA to get the career slam that we saw last month with what Rory McIlroy did. Jordan Spieth shot a terrible first round, was 5 over, and therefore ended at 5 over and did not make the cut. So I don't know if the pressure got to him, considering McIlroy did that, or that last month, or it was a situation where he just didn't play well, had other things on his mind, who knows. And now Jordan Spieth's going to have to wait another year in order for him to capture that PGA and the career Grand Slam. And I think it would be best for him if he were to win another major tournament prior to that. Only because, similar to Rory, when he hadn't won a major tournament in over 10 years. And obviously he needed that Masters in order to get the career slam. So obviously he did it the hard way, where he didn't have another major in between, where it's like, all right, now it's not a lot of pressure mounting, where the pressure was twofold for him, knowing that he had never won a Masters, and in order for him to win the career Grand Slam, he had to win that tournament. And therefore he did. Where maybe not a lot of fanfare for Spieth, I get it, because Rory, obviously with him being the face of the PGA for the most part, it was a situation where, oh my God, he's leading on the back nine or he's leading on the final round as he's heading into the back nine. He had a 4-stroke lead, if you recall, where it looked like it was a foregone conclusion he would win. And obviously we know what happened after that. But Spieth, I don't know. Did the pressure mount? Was it something that had just got the best of him where he didn't make the cut? Who knows? But you have to wait another year in order for him to get to that point where he could get the career Grand Slam. And as far as Rory is concerned, he barely made the cut, but finished at 3 over. So a lot of the thought process was now that he finally got the career slam and that elusive major, he's probably going to go on a run here where he'll probably win a few more. And granted, it's just 1 month after. I'm sure he's still basking in the glow of that. Let's see what happens next month at the U.S. Open and obviously the following month there at the Open Championship to see whether or not he gets back on the beam or does he start another 10-year drought. I don't know, but at this point, he got his Masters. He's got his career slam. That's not to say he could punt the rest of his career and just forget about it, but I'm sure a lot of fans would like to see him get another opportunity to win another Grand Slam considering that the piano is off his back and that he has plenty of golf ahead of him and certainly maybe another major 2 or even 3 in store for him to win down the road. That'll do it, my good people. Yes, I'm not talking about the Preakness. Remember what I said a week or so ago? Not talking about it, but that's over and done with. And so is this podcast. So, thank you so much for stopping by, carving out precious time out of your day to listen to what it is I have to say about what goes on in the wonderful world of the toy department of life called sports. As I appreciate you stopping by, carving out precious time out of your day to listen to what it is I have to say. And on top of all that, if you haven't subscribed, rated, reviewed, throw me a few stars, or write that review to say, wow, JAYREELZ does a great job, or JAYREELZ talks all sports. I get my one-stop sports shopping from him, because what other podcast out there does that? I don't know of many, or quite honestly, I don't know any. And I understand. There's niches, there's people that just gravitate to one sport. I cover it all. And yes, it may be a little bit longer than normal because of the time of year, but it doesn't matter because I got you covered. Yes, talking sports, in the blood, in the DNA, as I like to say. And I have to convey it yet again. As an independent podcaster, content creator, I implore you to please subscribe, rate, and review on all of my socials, on the YouTube channel, at JAYREELZ. Please take a screenshot of it. Make sure you send it to me. I'll send it out to the people that I follow. Pass it along to your family, friends, foes, frenemies who like sports, the casual sports fan, the good sports fan, the diehard sports fan, the kook sports fan like yours truly, because word of mouth will go a long way into increasing the visibility of this podcast because there's so many others that are out there, as you well know, and I'm trying to earn a living doing this, people. I'm doing this out of the love because when I quit my job over 15 months ago, and I haven't seen a thin dime yet, so I'm trying to gain traction in that particular avenue, and to go down that road to start cashing in, it is imperative for you to be a part of your participation in sharing the word and subscribing and doing all that. And of course, I thank you from the bottom of my heart doing so. And if you want to send me a note or a DM, anything, suggestion, comment, question, you could do so at the following on Instagram, TikTok, Facebook, the JAYREELZ Podcast, or just JAYREELZ on Instagram as well. Twitter, JAYREELZ1, just the number. The old-fashioned way, the JAYREELZ Podcast at gmail.com. I'll be more than happy to follow up with you guys and gals, because whether you do or do not know, one more time, this is what I love to do. I was cut out. I was built. I was born to do this. Like I mentioned, since birth, talking sports, not only regurgitating it, digesting it, watching it, reading it, following it, listening to it, once upon a time playing it. I am not going anywhere as long as I'm alive and breathing on God's green earth to share with you in front of this microphone and this camera my thoughts, opinions, critiques, analysis, praise with nothing but passion, fire, energy, fury, with everything that happens on the world of the diamond, ice, gridiron, hardwood, golf course, racetrack, tennis court, boxing ring, octagon, you name it. From my lips to your ears, from my heart to your soul, from where I am to wherever you are, the JAYREELZ Podcast always comes correct, direct, and in full effect. And that's the octagon. I didn't enunciate properly, so I had to correct myself. From the South Bronx, the South Beach, the South Central, the South Pacific, and all points beyond, peace, love, and God bless everybody. And until next time on the JAYREELZ Podcast, on the flip, baby.